Sports, 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 sports.
Hey there, sports fans. Welcome to Sportsball, part of the SPDM Crew podcast. We talk about sports-related topics, but we focus on you, the fan, and what you like, whether it's a sport, team, event, athlete, or sports-related news. Today, we're talking about it's starting to become an event for the NBA as well as some sports-related news. We're talking about the NBA trade deadline. And for this year's NBA trade deadline, for me at least, and I think for a lot of other people, to overshadow the Super Bowl, I think is a pretty big accomplishment because there were some seismic trades or one seismic trades and a lot of other little trades here and there. So I have here, this is the second time on, we talked about the Bears beforehand, but we're talking about the NBA. I've got Adam Resch back with us. Hello. How's it going, Adam?
Hey, Mike, I'm good, man. How are you?
I am great. So you mentioned that you wanted to talk about this, and I was so happy that you did. So before we kind of talk about some of the trades and some of the actual events that happened, why don't you give me like a current state of the NBA in terms of collective bargaining agreement and why we're kind of in this position that we are in right now when it comes to trades?
Absolutely. So we got to go backwards a little bit to kind of really move forward. In the last, we'll call it the last 15 years, we've been in kind of what's called this quote unquote player empowerment era, where a lot of the times in the past, it's mainly been the teams calling the shots on players. They kind of do what's really in their quote unquote best interest and don't have the players' best interest at heart. That really has kind of flipped on its head over the last 15 years. We can kind of almost pinpoint it back to when LeBron James made his quote unquote decision to leave the Cleveland Cavaliers and go to the Miami Heat. Now, he was a free agent. He was not under contract with them, but it definitely sparked the whole idea of player movement. And the NBA and its fans especially have really embraced that as part of their culture and really part of what makes the league so exciting. As much as it is about the games, it's more so about these hypothetical teaming up these superstars together. Where's this guy going to go? Where's this player going to go? Oh, so-and-so is upset. He's going to leave now. We've seen this over the last 10 years especially, and it's what makes the NBA so intriguing. But then really over the last, we'll call it the 5 years or so, there have been a lot of new changes to the NBA CBA. Now, CBA, obviously, as you said, stands for the collective bargaining agreement. One of the things that really happened is setting up structures in the teams to where there are harsher penalties for teams that spend more money, essentially. So let's just kind of set the base of where teams are at, essentially. So every team has what's called a quote unquote salary cap or a salary floor. So the teams have to spend $126 million on player payroll every single year. That is the minimum. And then there's, that's kind of where it needs to be. And then there's this salary cap. And I'm using air quotes right now because even though it's technically there, teams can go over the salary cap. It only makes sense for teams that actually, if there's a salary cap in place, if they don't have the players under contract. Now, there's this little thing in the NBA that's called bird rights. It's named after Larry Bird, essentially. And basically what it allows teams to do, that if a team has a player for a specific time, they can go over the salary cap and re-sign that player. So when they have specific players who have all these bird rights, that's how they can keep going over the salary cap without being penalized. And then the next part is there's what's called the luxury tax. So the luxury tax is about $170 million, just a little bit, right under 171. And essentially what that means is that if you go over that luxury tax, you're basically going to be penalized, or the team is going to be penalized 1.5 times for every dollar. So basically, if you're $2 million over, that team has to pay a $3 million penalty to the NBA. And then that really just eventually just gets dispersed back to the league, essentially. It's kind of a weird concept, but that's how the NBA says, hey, this is how we're going to have competitive balance. And then the other kicker on top of that, too, is that now they've implemented something called a repeat offender tax. So if a team is a luxury tax team multiple years, then we just start multiplying basically what their penalty is going to be. So really a lot of what this trade deadline was for a lot of teams wasn't really more so basketball decisions in terms of this is how this player fits with this, or, we're trying to gear up for a championship run. A lot of what teams were doing was getting under that luxury tax so that they didn't have to pay those penalties. And it makes sense on some levels because because what can happen next is that then we're going to start getting into the extra things that happens to teams and what type of restrictions they have for player signings and player tradings. But then also there's the financial component as well as to the money owed for these teams. Again, these are sports teams, but at the end of the day, they're also running a business. They can't just hemorrhage money like that. So once we get over this luxury tax part, there's what's called the first apron. And so the first apron is $178 million. So it's $7-ish million over the luxury tax. And right now there's 4 teams. So there's only, this is how well the league is done, I guess. There's only 7 teams that are either first or second apron teams. And when I start saying the teams, you're going to be like, oh yeah, what's the commonality between all these teams? They're either going to be towards the top of the league in terms of their standings, or they're going to have some of the biggest superstars in the game. So there's 4 first apron teams right now. It's the Denver Nuggets, the Los Angeles Lakers, the New York Knicks, and Milwaukee. So basically in this first apron team, there's really 3 major restrictions that they have. So they can't acquire players and sign and trade if that player keeps them above the apron. So essentially, that's and sign and trades are a much more common practice in the NBA because of all the salary issues that teams have, we'll call it. We don't have as many situations where players will just outright leave and someone gets signed into cap space. There's a lot of sign and trades that happens because it really happens for a couple of reasons. You've got the facilitation of money. It's easier on everybody's cap. And then also the players that get that signing can keep those bird rights, like what we talked about before, where again, they can go back to the other team to re-sign for more money later in the future. So that's a big part of it. There's also another component too, where these first apron teams can't sign a player that was waived during the regular season if their salary was over what's called the mid-level exception, which is $12.2 million. So an example like this is there was a Ben Simmons who played for the Brooklyn Nets was bought out by Brooklyn. So these 4 teams and then the 3 other second apron teams, he could not sign with them because of this rule. So that's another thing where, again, it kind of prohibits a team like this in this bracket. And not that there's a lot of buyout players, nor do buyout players really become super available / helpful in championship runs, but they can help in some other things. And then the third one is one that really that's been a bigger deal over the last few years, is the salary matching in trades. So it used to be you could go over the salary to 125%. So again, using number perspective, that basically means a lot for bigger, this would really be helpful for when it's bigger salary players. So for example, you have a superstar player who makes $50 million, let's just say. They could be traded for somebody who's a $40 million player, and it would still fall within those financial parameters under the old CBA, but now it's got to be within 110%. So now you have to get that together to be 45 million instead. And so again, it comes down to the whole, you can't just do simple 1-for-1s. You have to sometimes do a 3-for-1, 4-for-1. Not every team is really interested in that. So that's really the biggest restrictions. And then the next group is called the second apron. So again, this is teams that basically just go above this salary number. This is the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Golden State Warriors, and the Phoenix Suns. And really with these, there's the previous rules that we talked about with the first apron obviously apply to them, but then there's also a couple other rules too. So number one, there's teams can't use a trade exception generated by aggregating the salaries of multiple players. And what that means essentially is that a trade exception is basically created whenever there's a difference in salaries. So again, we talk about, high dollar players. You trade someone for $40 million and you only take back 20 million in that deal, then that team creates a $20 million trade exception. So basically what that means is that whenever they make a deal, again, that team could use that $20 million exception to absorb that extra salary. So that's how you can work out some of these bigger number trades. But again, when you're a restricted team, that's what can happen. Second thing is it can include cash in a trade. And a lot of times this is something that some of the more profitable teams will do. Again, you see a team like Golden State, Phoenix, Minnesota. They're making a lot more money because they have superstars. They bring in more ticket, more ticket revenue. They make a trade with somebody like Charlotte or New Orleans, who are, lower level teams. Sometimes they'll just take cash to help offset some of the cost and, some of the revenue sharing, but they can't do that. And then really the other thing that happens, and this is going to dovetail into the next part, has to do with restrictions on trades. So basically, first round picks that are 7 years out get frozen, which is just like an absurd thing to think about. But one of the things that happens is teams what that means is that teams can go and trade first round picks within 7 years. However, they cannot trade picks in consecutive years because of what's called the Stepien rule. So the Stepien rule was implemented, I think, in the 1980s because the old Cleveland Cavaliers owner just traded draft picks whenever he wanted, and there were no consequences. And so the NBA stepped in and was like, hey, we don't want this happening anymore. It's bad for the league. It's not, something we want to do. It ruins the competitive balance, is what they said. And then another rule that's in here. So if a team's first round pick can be moved to the end of the first round, if they are in the second apron for 3 out of 5 seasons. So that's a new wrinkle that got thrown into this next CBA. Now, again, it doesn't fully matter to some of these other teams who are in here because draft picks in the NBA just don't mean like what they mean in the NFL. NFL team, if they have, 3 first round picks, that's a huge deal.
Right.
We've got Brooklyn. Brooklyn has 3 first round picks, but they have their first round pick, and then they have 2 other picks that are slated to be in the 20s. And the NBA draft picks, those are literally anything after pick 8 or 9, you're getting a lottery ticket essentially, and most of the time you end up with $1 instead of the $10 million.
Right.
So that's kind of where it is. And the draft picks, this is crazy. I had to look this up because if you were to look at what is the draft order going to look like this year, and there are only 9 teams in this upcoming draft that actually own their draft pick in terms of this is the team that's actually picked. Like the Chicago Bulls had to retrade their first round pick. They're one of 9 teams that they actually have their pick. All 21 picks are either going to be traded or have conditions that are basically if the team finishes, first through 6, they don't get their pick, or it's top. They have the NBA has this cool thing. They have draft protection, exactly. Top 10 protected, lottery protected. You have picks that, if it doesn't convey, it's going to go to turn into 2 second-round picks. And then I even looked this up. This is even crazier too. In 2026, there are only 6 teams that own their pick outright with no conditions, and in 2027, it's 8 teams. And I didn't even look at future years, and I don't want to because it's going to spit out the same type of stuff. But that's what happens. So then we go back to the rule of the Stepien rule, where it's teams can trade consecutive year picks of their own. So nobody can trade draft picks. So you're only taking players, and players in the NBA, it's kind of grouped of there's obviously impactful superstars, and everybody else is just kind of how good is your contract. If you have a good contract, you can be traded. If you don't, you can't. And so that's the kind of other thing too. And then I'll get one last thing. Is that teams are really less patient with young players. And it's a bit surprising. And obviously we had a couple big trades that happened too, but I was looking back into the last few years. So in the late 2010s, so 2016, 2017, and 2018, each of those drafts, there's only 2 players that were picked in the top 10 that are still with the team that drafted them. Now, obviously, people got traded on draft night, but I'm not counting that.
Yeah.
And then even 2019 was only 6 years ago. There's only 4 players on their team that originally picked them. So you've got all these things moving. The NBA is definitely a league where there is less urgency on the developing of players. And that's how we get to this crazy state where we're at right now. Now, it is entertaining. Let's not get it twisted. It is fun to see. It is fun to go through. But it does make for a very challenging structure with team construction and putting trades together. And even when you see some of these trades, it's just hilarious because there's trades that start out as 3-team trades. Then we have to add a 4th team, and then there's a 5th team who's literally just moving salary or second round picks just to make the trades work. And it's like, this would never happen in the NFL. The NFL would never have a 3-team trade. They're just so straight and narrow. And the NBA, we just have these crazy things. And then again, you get people who put together these 4-team trades. You go on the NBA trade machine and you're trading 4 superstars, and you're like, well, it works salary wise, so it must be a good trade.
So it must be okay. Yeah, exactly. It's crazy because over the last, I would say 5 to 10 years, just some of the things that have been going on within the NBA, it's a direct result of teams just like overspending in order to try and get the best team possible. And you're actually seeing less and less teams want to do that, because you mentioned the LeBron James decision, and that gave way to the big three, in a sense. Like, in order for you to have like a true championship contender, you need to have 3 all NBA level players, and then pretty much scraps from, just salary filler and people on minimum contracts, and just fringe players that could contribute in a positive way. And you're seeing kind of that move in a different direction now, because it's so expensive to build a big 3 right now. And teams are making do with a big 2 and then a lot of like really great players around them. And the second round pick has become something that is kind of felt like an afterthought, but now all these teams are trying to scoop all these picks up in order to stockpile them to get a trade. So I find that very interesting, that the second round pick is starting to definitely become something that's more valuable in terms of transactions. Whether or not those transactions actually convey a pick is a whole separate issue, because second round picks are, if you equate a second or first round pick later in the draft to possibly getting like a dollar on a lottery, the second round pick, you may get a dollar, but you may get punched in the dick by a homeless person, because it's like, you never know what you're going to get from a second round pick. There have been
I was going to say a nickel, but I think your analogy works much better for this. I appreciate that. Yeah.
I tried to go with a vivid metaphor, but the second round pick, there have been a lot of great second round picks that have come up, a lot of second round picks that are all defense players, all stars, all NBA players, different things like that. Even undrafted players are starting to get some attention as well. So that's definitely a plus. And then last thing I wanted to kind of talk about is that the development of NBA players has certainly taken a hit over the last couple of years, because the leash is shorter and shorter. And a part of that is due to coaching and the inability for coaches to want to focus on development versus wanting to win now, because coaches, their leashes are just as short as well. So they don't get the opportunity to develop their system and develop what they want for their team. But there's also more options around the world as well. So the whole NBA relationship with the G League has definitely blossomed over the last couple of years. The over time, like the G League Ignite, that folded up because the NCAA NIL rules have kind of opened up, so more people would probably be more attracted to go into college. But then there's a lot more overseas options as well. So with the development piece, if somebody has the ability to make an NBA team, but they don't make it, at least there's options for them to go to if it doesn't work out for them, and then work their way to getting back on an NBA roster. And then there's certain players who get drafted super late by a team that his father plays on, that doesn't deserve to be in the league in the first place. And now, and then there's that too. So yeah, so all of this to say, lots going on with the NBA collective bargaining agreement. A lot is going on. And this season's trade deadline, which happened at the time of this recording almost a week ago because we're about to head into All-Star weekend at the time of this recording. So there were some doozies of trades, lots of people being moved. So I guess now's a good time. Let's talk your impactful trades. You said you had five, right?
I had five and an honorable mention too.
Yeah, I had five and one honorable mention as well. So look, we might as well start with the top trade, which I honestly thought was fake when I first read it. You know, I fell asleep the night before and I woke up like in the middle of the night. I was like, Luka Doncic? No, no, no. Wait. Oh, this is real. This is real. So I am wondering if that is your most impactful trade as well, or the one that you want to talk about first. But that was the one that definitely caught me the most off guard. So
Yeah, same camp as you. I Similar reaction. I didn't wake up in the middle of the night, but I woke up first thing in the morning and I was just like, I'm just gonna scroll through X and see what's going on here. And the one of the first tweets I saw was it was from a football person tweeting about Luca. And I'm like, what is this guy talking about? And then I looked at it and they're like, Luka Doncic got traded. And same thing. I thought it was fake. I was like, what the hell's going on here? Because I don't know about you, but like I've been following like Bill Simmons for a long time, and Bill Simmons, who's very famous with his NBA commentary, he came out with a trade value, and he came out with like a trade value like thing that he does every single year, and he had Luka Doncic as basically like the third most valuable player in a basic category that's like this guy would never be traded. Well, he got traded, and
yes,
like and it was stunning, and I'm like, and then he got traded to the Lakers, and you're like, how does he get to the Lakers? And I'm like, the Lakers don't have anybody, like they don't have anyone who would really fit his model. Because I think what has happened, especially too, is that there have been other bigger trades for superstars. You know, you think about really the ones in the last 3, 4 years. It's Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, and Kevin Durant, and all those three trade packages. They're all featured around some type of young, good young players and a shitload of draft picks. This was not one of those trades. The Maverick, and I feel bad. I feel bad for Anthony Davis because I think Anthony Davis has really gotten shit on in the last like 2 weeks,
yep.
and he's a Hall of Famer. Like he's not like a bad player, but the problem is there's so many problems. It's first of all, you're trading a 26-year-old player who's been a five-time first team All NBA team. He just took your team to the conference finals, and who like he's one of the best players in the world. Like the Lakers automatically win this trade because they got the best player. Like that's the very clear thing. But the part that really pissed me off was that this was basically a deal that was done between two friends. So Nico Harrison, the GM for the Dallas Mavericks, Rob Pelinka, the general manager for the Los Angeles Lakers, they work together at Nike. So they have this past relationship, and they basically started talking about this about, I think, like a month before the trade went down. And it was just basically like, hey, like, would you do this deal? And the hilarious thing is that the Lakers like thought they were joking. The Lakers are like, wait, are you serious? Like you would trade us Luka? And it's just one of these things where it's just like, again, you talked about it where you were like earlier when we talked about the draft picks about like the lottery ticket. And like I equated this to like Luka is a $2 bill. So he's obviously the best thing in here. Anthony Davis is a $1 bill. Whatever that extra crap is, sure, that's fine. So the Lakers, they got the best deal here. But I was just I was stunned because at first I actually hated the trade because I was just like, this actually makes both these teams worse in the short term. Like the Lakers were already like an average defensive team. Luka, I love Luka. He is a fun player to watch. He's not a defensive player, not a defensive savant at all. And Anthony Davis going to Dallas, it's like they have a bunch of big men. Now they're all hurt, and then just the ironic twist of Anthony Davis, I think, played like 2 games and then got hurt, and all their other big men are hurt. So it's like you kind of feel bad for him in that sense again. But it's just like this deal again. It's just basketball's different than football. And then the hilarious thing too was like football people were trying to be like, this would be the equivalent of like, Joe Burrow for like Matthew Stafford essentially is basically kind of what I don't think what everybody came up with, but that was it. But like the basketball, like you always want the best player.
Right.
Almost every trade in NBA history says that if you get the best player or you get the player, doesn't really matter what your trade package is. You're going to win that trade. So like I already love this for the Lakers, and like now they're basically going to pass the torch. I mean, it's crazy. They've went from Magic Johnson, and then they had a couple of years where they kind of struggled. Then they got Shaq and Kobe. Then they got LeBron late in his career. They had Anthony Davis as well. And now they're going to go to Luka Doncic. It's insane. And I feel bad for Dallas fans. Like when you get a guy like this, like you expect him to be there for his entire career. And the worst part is like there was never anything like Luka has just been completely praised. He's completely praised Dallas. You never heard anything about it. There wasn't anything about like, oh, he's not going to sign a contract extension with us. Like they didn't talk to his agent at all. Like there's so many things that are just like so bad. Like, so you don't talk to the agent, you don't talk to the player, and then you only negotiate with one team. And it's like, this is the, like, and from Dallas's side, I kind of understand it because they're probably thinking to themselves, again, we talked about kind of the coach and the GM. The GM wants the best deal, but the coach is like, I want the best player. I mean, Anthony Davis, again, like he's a Hall of Fame player. He's still really good. Yes, he gets hurt, but he's still like a good player. And he probably was the best actual player you're going to get. But what happens with Dallas now is that you've got Anthony Davis, who's 32 years old. You've got Klay Thompson, who's 34. Kyrie Irving is 33. Now you have this old core for maybe a couple years. You better be good.
Right.
Because the Lakers are they're going to be set up for a while now. Luka, now there hasn't been anything yet that's come out about Luka not staying with Los Angeles long term, but it feels like every indication is that he's going to be there. So again, there's risk for the Lakers. He could leave in a year and a half and go play for somebody else. And then the Lakers are just like, and maybe that's the Lakers saving grace is like, well, we only gave up, past his prime Anthony Davis and, a first round pick 6 years down the road. We don't care about that.
Right.
So that's maybe their saving grace, but holy shit, this is just one of those trades where you're like, this is not going to look good. And then Anthony Davis gets hurt. He's now out for like multiple weeks. Luka's only played one game, I think, so far, and he's on a minutes restriction. And so like, okay, that's fine. He'll get there. And again, the whole reporting that came afterwards where they're trying to be like, Luka's out of shape. Luka doesn't take care of his body.
His conditioning isn't very good.
His conditioning isn't very good. He's averaging a 27, 8, and 8. And it's like, again, you can kind of understand some of those things. Like, it's not crazy. It's not a crazy thing that they did. But then when it's like, oh yeah, you traded a guy that's a top 5 player in the league. You didn't get any future draft. Again, you got a draft pick 6 years down the road. No one cares about that. Right. Like you got to try and win now. It was, and then, the Lakers tried to, they had a trade that fell through for them. So like, they still need like a big man. So like, again, they're not perfect, but again, this is the NBA. You want to get the stars. You want to get the best player. They're on that right path. They just got to do more. Like, I don't feel like they're going to be a major contender this season because there is still going to be so much time to kind of put things together. But this is down the road. Again, you're trying to just think big picture. They're going to be set up just fine.
So, okay. Couple things to kind of note is that this is actually the second time that Luka Doncic has been traded because the Atlanta Hawks traded Luka for Trae Young, which that was a mutually beneficial trade on draft night, even though Luka has turned out to be far and away the superior player. So Luka has ingratiated himself into the Dallas fan base. He has consistently won playoff series for them. He took them to the NBA Finals last year, literally carrying the team on his back with performance after performance that was just one for the ages. So I get what Dallas is saying, that they want somebody who wants to play defense, who's going to take care of their body. And He's not the type of player that the Dallas Mavericks wants, which the quotes from the GM and the owner have been very curious because, like, guys, you're kicking the guy that has been a just franchise stalwart for you for the last like 4 or 5 years. Don't kick him on the way out. And this is something that you did as well. So I thought that was kind of shitty of them to do that. And you said that, you understand, like, unless this core of Dallas Mavericks players. So let's say your core is Anthony Davis, Kyrie Irving, Daniel Gafford, the Derek Lively big man combo, because AD has always said that he wants to play with a center. He'd prefer to play power forward, which to me is horseshit. You should be playing center, but I get it. It's fine because AD has those unique big man skills that you see in the modern NBA where he can shoot on the outside, he can post up, he can be a Swiss Army knife for a big man that I think every team is clamoring for now. So if your core team and you throw Klay Thompson on that team, if they don't win a championship in the next couple of years, then this trade was a massive failure because Luka Doncic is still not in his prime yet. He's only 25 now, and he still has lots of runway to go. And I'm thinking now, I could be wrong about this because this is kind of a roll of the dice. I certainly hope that this will be a bit of a wake-up call for Luka, that he needs to get in better shape, and what better person to learn from in the twilight of his career than LeBron James for something like that, because LeBron is not going to play forever. He's got, I think his decline is very evident now. So it's going to be a couple more years before I think this is fully Luka Doncic's team without like the shadow of LeBron James around. I'm not necessarily sure I trust Rob Pelinka to put a competent team around Luka. That's my only concern. But without a doubt, the Lakers got the best possible outcome from this. I do agree. I think the way they went about it was really shitty because you want to try to cast the net out as far as possible to see if you can get the best trade that you can. And I'm sure that there are better trade opportunities. There were maybe better trade opportunities out there. Who knows? Because there were reports out there that they were sniffing around with Milwaukee. They were sniffing around with Phoenix as well. So there were some other opportunities, but for Dallas to get the return that they did is probably the best that they could have come up with. And I don't know, this feels like something that they didn't want the press to get wind of, that, hey, we're shopping around Luka Doncic. And the guy was injured at this time. Him and Anthony Davis, they got traded for each other, two All-NBA players, while they're taking care of stuff. Sorry, someone's looking at me right now. Got two All-NBA players traded for each other that are also injury prone too. So that's just another wrinkle in this. I don't know what Dallas is going to do from here, but in order for this trade to look semi-good, they have to do something to preserve this core of individuals. And Luka, for the Luka side as well, I just hope that Rob Pelinka can put a competent team around him, because Rob Pelinka has had a mixed record when it comes to being a GM, and we'll see how that pans out. But Luka's already ingratiated himself into LA. He's wanting to donate stuff for wildfire relief. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what happens from there. And I think I was shocked as well because Luka Doncic is on my fantasy basketball team. He fell to me because I think a couple other people got drafted first, and I was like, really? No one's going to take Luka? Okay, I will do that. So yeah, we'll see how this pans out for this trade. This is definitely a shocker of a trade.
Yeah, and I think, and just one thing real quick, in some of the comments that came out of the Dallas owner's mouth too, is he was talking about like, the greats who like dedicate themselves to the game, and like, I think he had mentioned like MJ and Kobe, and
Bird.
he put Larry Bird in there, and then he
And
put Shaq
Shaq.
in there,
Yeah.
which was just objectively hilarious because Shaq pulled this same type of, if you want to talk about conditioning type of stuff, Shaq did this stuff in the 2000s, and it's the main reason why the Lakers traded him to the Heat in 2004. So I think that the Lakers are like, we'll take this guy. He's going to get in shape. We can, I think that that's their grandmaster plan, is like they're going to make Luka the best version of himself and just totally give the giant middle finger to Dallas and be like, thank you for this. This is our meal ticket now for the next decade. And I'm just like, and that's just what happens sometimes. And again, Dallas too, Mark Cuban sold the team, like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Mark Cuban never would have made this deal. Like
No,
if Mark Cuban heard about this, he would have flipped his shit and he would have been like this. But this is another little wrinkle of the NBA is you get some of these non-NBA people in and they start worrying about money and they're like, oh, it's like, well, we're going to pay this guy $350 million. And it's like, but he doesn't take himself seriously or get in shape. But it's like, okay, he's not in shape, but he's still averaging 27, 8 and 8. And still he's a top 5 player in the league. Like we got to have smarter owners, but we also, this is what makes the NBA fun, is when we have stupid owners and stupid general managers doing stupid things.
Yes, agree. All right, you mentioned the Mark Williams trade, because right now, by all accounts, the Lakers do not have a full-time center. They just don't. They just signed Alex Len from the buyout market, so there's that. But Mark Williams was supposed to be the player that was supposed to be this great lob threat. He had great offensive numbers. His defense was not great, and he's very much injury prone, which is hilarious to me that they would trade an injury prone center when they just had AD, who is also an injury prone power forward / center. So the deal, I understand why they made it, but they ended up rescinding it because they got some medical records and they were like, whoa, we don't like what we see here, which to me, it's like, wouldn't you have done that research beforehand a little bit, like a little bit more? But
yeah, it's a little, it's that type of stuff is tricky, because again, some agents, some teams will withhold this type of stuff,
Yeah.
and not saying that it's right or wrong, but it's just, that's kind of how it can work.
It's the nature
It
of
is
the trade. Yeah,
exactly. And again, it's the trade deadline. It's like, hey, you're not doing this a week before where you have the time to get the physicals in and all that. It's like, this is what happens. This is the risk you run. That's why the trade deadline can be so unpredictable and those type of things. So, and again too, and the price they gave up too was pretty rich. They essentially gave up Dalton Connect, who was their first round pick. It was Cam Reddish, and then a future first round pick, which again, we know that those first round picks can be, they can mean nothing, but still, young player. Again, Mark Williams, like you kind of said, he's very much a prototypical hypothetical player, where it's like everything that you write down on paper is really good, but then he just, you need defense, and he's just not very strong defensively. He was a below average defensive presence, even though he's massive. He's 7'2" with a 9'9" standing reach, which basically means he can almost touch the rim by just lifting his hands above his head. Like he's a giant human being, but injury concerns, defensive lapses. Yeah, they signed Alex Len, who, sure, fine, he'll play, but
he's a warm body.
You're going to be,
at this point.
exactly. He's a warm body. You're going to be, you might have to play Denver, or you're going to have to play Houston, who has Şengün, or Memphis, who has, Jaren Jackson Jr. So how are you going to match up with that? I mean, obviously, Lakers' counterpoint is going to be, well, how are you going to match up with Luka Doncic and LeBron James? Very fair argument. But again, it's not 2-on-5. It's not 2-on-2. It's 5-on-5. So we'll see what happens. I think the Lakers are they're a very interesting team. They're going to be interesting for sure. Yeah. I don't know where they fit in the championship picture. We'll see.
Because the other problem that they're going to have with that trade being rescinded is that Dalton Connect has come out and said, oh, I need to sort through my feelings about all of this. And okay, there are two potential schools of thoughts with this. Is that one, welcome to the NBA, kid. You just got to suck it up and you got to deal with it. However, it's also his first year. in the NBA. So we got to give him just like a tad bit of grace for that. But also, Dalton Connect was somebody that like fell to the Lakers in last year's draft. He was supposed to be drafted much higher. So everyone is touting him as being part of the future. So I'm going to be monitoring that because his season this year has been fine overall. This year's rookie class has been very, very up and down. So he's someone that I'm going to monitor in the future to see how this is going to affect him moving forward. Is this going to have an adverse effect on his psyche, or is he going to use this as fuel to get better? Who knows? But we shall see about that. Give me one of your trades that you want to talk about, because I have a feeling that we have very similar trades on here, but give me your next one.
Yeah, my next one was Golden State getting Jimmy Butler from the Miami Heat.
So that was originally my number 3, but I moved it to number 2 after thinking about it because it was between that or the De'Aaron Fox trade. And the Jimmy Butler trade is a win now move. The De'Aaron Fox trade is a win soon move. So that's why I ended up going with Jimmy Butler. So why don't you go ahead and kind of give us the details of the Jimmy Butler trade, which, boy, what a way to conclude like perhaps the worst breakup in NBA, like between an NBA player and an NBA team in a very long time.
Yeah, a very ugly, very public breakup. Those things are always kind of weird. And even for somebody who, I want to make sure it's all relative about what you say as someone who's quote unquote successful, because I think one of the problems with like judging NBA players as well is like, it's this rings culture where it's like, if you don't have a championship, you're a bum, but it's like, well, we've only had, there's only one championship every year, it's like, it's kind of hard to do it. And when you have these Hall of Fame caliber players, it's like, yeah, that's what can happen. So I think when I had originally written this down, it was a 4-team trade. I think it ultimately went to like a 5-team trade because I think that there were salary movements. So essentially what happens is that the Warriors got Jimmy Butler, and it's really based upon 2 teams. It's the Warriors and the Heat. So the Heat get Andrew Wiggins, PJ Tucker, Kyle Anderson, and a 2025 first-round pick from the Warriors that's top 10 protected, which will likely convey this year. So again, going back to our whole no team actually owns their pick. And then the Pistons and the Jazz, and I think maybe the Raptors were involved with just moving players around. But it's really funny because when this happened, again, this was another one where I was like, I kind of hate this trade. I kind of hate the trade in terms of the fit because the first thing that my mind went to was that the Warriors were trying to go back into the 2010s and get their big 3. So you've got Steph, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green. And then I started thinking to myself, and I was because I think what has warped our basketball minds is that when Kevin Durant joined the Warriors in 2016, like that kind of just became like our basketball, like our perfect hypothetical basketball team is that you have players that can handle the ball, they can shoot threes, not necessarily, defensively super great, but at least they try. That's the most important thing. And so that's kind of where my brain went. And then I'm like, okay, you've got Steph Curry, who's the greatest shooter of all time, and his 2 main running partners are Draymond Green and Jimmy Butler. 2 players not exactly known as 3-point threats. But then when I started thinking about it, I was like, well, maybe this means that Golden State will run the ball a little more through Jimmy Butler and Steph can do his off-ball stuff. And one of the beautiful things about watching Steph Curry is that the gravitational pull he has on the court, it's that everybody has to watch him, has to know where he is. There's all eyes are looking at him, all bodies are following him. And when you start thinking about it, you're like, this is actually a really fun marriage between these 2 players. And they've even talked about it too publicly since it's happened because of their contrasting styles, where Steph is more away from the basket. Jimmy Butler is a more, closer to the basket player. So it's actually something that could be a fun fit. They beat up on the Bulls too. So like you got to see that. That was fun. I think they beat the Bucks as well. So again, it's only a couple games. I think the thing for me, like I was shocked when it was like they made the trade and I was like, okay, like it had been talked about for a couple of days. It wasn't super surprising. But then they're like, Jimmy Butler agrees to a 2-year extension and it was like $110 million. And I was like, holy shit. I was like, I did not expect that to happen that quickly. So because he had basically earlier in the week, they had said Jimmy Butler wasn't going to sign with Golden State. So like when this all happened, like obviously, there's a lot of posturing about what they're going to actually do.
Mhm.
But it's still something where you're just like, okay, this isn't going to happen. The biggest thing with Butler is going to be his availability in this sense. He hasn't played more than 65 games in a season since the 2016-2017 season when he was with Chicago. This will be his fourth team now that he's been on since then.
And all of those, with the exception of maybe Philly, because Philly, he wasn't on the 76ers for that long. All of these teams for Jimmy Butler have ended horribly as well.
Yeah, exactly. And part of it is, and I know he gets a lot of bad rap about it too. And then like also the things he said, like he hasn't been wrong about things and in some instances. I think with the Philly thing, he was bitter because they had basically picked Tobias Harris over him. He even made a comment when they played in the playoffs a few years ago where he was like, Tobias Harris over me. So and that's part of his persona. That's what makes him, that he has that dog in him, as the kids say. I'm not gonna say that like that's what I say, but that's what he does. That's what he projects, and that's how he helps. That's how he carries himself. That's what makes him who he is. So it's one of those things where it's like when I first saw it, I was like, I hate the trade, I hate the fit, because I love watching Steph. I am a Steph Curry fan. Golden State's like I've always admired them. So like I'm like, this could be really bad. But then I started thinking about it. I'm like, okay, this might actually be this might actually work with them. I actually feel like the Heat actually got a really good deal for Jimmy Butler too, because like all the other stuff that they were getting thrown out, it was like you're getting Bradley Beal, and like it's like okay, Bradley Beal, like he's going to score 25 points a game, but you're going to be you're kind of going to suck. Andrew Wiggins isn't like a perfect basketball player. He was the number one pick in 2014, and I think he's kind of had some unfair expectations throughout his career. He was the second best player on the Warriors when they won their championship. He was a massive reason why they won. He's not the personality type. He's not the type A, that alpha personality, but he's a really good basketball player. The Heat are re-identifying themselves. Tyler Hero's had an unbelievable year for them. They had an all-star team. Bam Adebayo is still one of the more underappreciated big men in the NBA.
Having a bit of an off year, but a lot of those guys who played in the Summer Olympics this year have kind of been having off years. So that still doesn't change the fact that he's a great player. So him, Hero, and they still got Spoelstra, who is among one of the best coaches in the NBA right now.
Exactly. And who knows with the East? They're probably not going to make much noise in the playoffs, but who knows? I mean, anything can happen. We have a very topsy-turvy East at this point. If somebody gets hurt, that's going to open a door for anybody. And the Heat, they have that aura about them where it's like they're going to make something work. They've been doing it for the last decade, where they pull guys off the street and they become rotation players. Now, there's a very big difference between developing superstars and rotation players, but the Heat are a great example of team that's kind of built, that's built around the fringes and really gotten a lot out of players. So again, it's going to be hard. And Jimmy Butler also wasn't having a great year too. So like, it's not like they were losing this massive piece because of his lack of availability, but it's still from that presence, like we talked about, that type of mentality, taking that away, it can hurt them a little bit. But again, it seemed very clear that this marriage was over. It ran its course.
Yeah, for sure. And so far, the couple games that Jimmy Butler has played, he's had a shitload of free throws, and that is a kind of attacking presence that the Warriors have not had in a long time, maybe since, Kevin Durant. And I wouldn't even consider that to be much of an attacking presence. So, because that was kind of the flip side of this deal, is that Jimmy Butler made it known that he wanted to go to Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
And Phoenix tried a lot of different things to make that happen, including potentially trading Kevin Durant back to the Warriors. And Kevin Durant emphatically was like, no. And Bradley Beal, who has a no trade clause, could have vetoed every single thing that could have come his way. And on the
Shout
hand,
out to Bradley Beal for getting a no trade clause.
it
There's two players in the NBA with a no trade clause. It's LeBron James and Bradley Beal.
clearly on the same wavelength in terms of success. Uh, but but to your point earlier, that's that whole situation that's going on in Phoenix, that's management's fault, specifically their new owner's fault. The reason why they're in that situation, because now you're going to have an unhappy Kevin Durant who's like, you tried to trade me, and an unhappy Bradley Beal who is like, whoa, 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 whoa. I call the shots because you traded for me and you didn't have me rescind my no trade clause like an idiot. So now I have all the leverage. He said that like a couple weeks ago, and I was like, "Yep, sure does. You got nothing, buddy."
Yeah.
So I ultimately think that this will be a better move for Jimmy Butler because I think I'm hoping that Steve Kerr, who has made a career of corralling players with big personalities and making them coalesce together for success, and I think Jimmy Butler will now he'll get his quote joy for playing basketball again because that's what he said he wanted a couple weeks ago. So I'm hoping that that will all work out ultimately for him because him and the Miami Heat they had success. They went to the NBA Finals twice, the bubble season and then a couple of years ago. And a couple of years ago, when Jimmy Butler literally dragged the Miami Heat to the NBA Finals, he did it in spectacular fashion from a playoff berth or a play-in berth to all the way to the NBA Finals. It's crazy, and for it to end this way, I think it kind of sucks. But I hope that somewhere down the road, that the Miami Heat will look back fondly on their time with Jimmy Butler and just remember all the good times that, or all the success that he's brought them, despite the fact that it ended poorly.
Yeah, and the year in 2022, they had Boston in a game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals. He missed a shot right at the end that would have won the game.
Yeah.
And so it's like that was almost 3. So it's like that's even thing. And like you're right, like I think it's one of those things where time's going to heal all wounds. And is he going to get his jersey retired? They're probably not, but you're definitely going to appreciate it, especially when you start seeing players in this era, how many guys have or have not made NBA finals. Like Jimmy Butler, like his career is going to be extremely fascinating how it plays out. I also think too for the Warriors, I think this is also a good thing because they have their the young guys, like the Jonathan Kuminga, the Brandon Pajemskis. Those guys' names were getting thrown around a lot as like, oh, they're trade targets, and oh, they were trying to trade for Paul George over the summer too before he eventually signed with the 76ers. And I think that this direction, I think it gives that team a little more clarity of like, okay, we've got the timeline set with Steph and Draymond and Jimmy. They're all basically now on, these next 2. So like this is our team, and so like let's make this work. At least that's what I hope. Like, I hope that's what happens with it and can kind of just give this team a little bit of peace of mind that, hey, these are our guys moving forward. Don't worry about the trade rumors. Let's go play ball. Let's try and win 1 or 2 more championships.
Right. Well, let's talk about this De'Aaron Fox trade because I'm assuming it's somewhere on your list. I could be wrong.
It was next, yeah.
Okay. So De'Aaron Fox, who is the Sacramento Kings, I believe he's a point guard who he's still pretty young. He's made one All-Star team. He's had some minor playoff success or at least playoff exposure, but once it became kind of obvious that he wasn't long for his time in Sacramento, which granted, in his defense, I don't think a lot of people are long for Sacramento, given their ownership situation and given their general history in terms of treating their players as well. So Sacramento trades De'Aaron Fox to the San Antonio Spurs along with Jordan McLaughlin. In return, the Sacramento Kings get a treasure trove. They've got not a treasure trove because it's all kind of a roll of the dice in a sense. 3 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks, some random scrub, and then Zach LaVine from the Chicago Bulls. And in return, the Chicago Bulls get Zach Collins, Trey Jones, Kevin Huerter, the Red Rocket himself, and their own 2025 first-round pick via San Antonio, even though if they would have kept doing what they were doing, they probably would have kept it anyways. Which that's the thing that kind of irks me about this deal, even though you get a little bit of peace of mind to know that, hey, whatever we do now, we're going to get that first round pick. It's all good. But Adam, give me your thoughts on this De'Aaron Fox trade to the San Antonio Spurs so that he could play with Victor Wembanyama, who is going to be the next guy for the NBA in the years to come.
Yeah, I mean, for San Antonio, this was an unbelievable win for them, because this is one of those things too that can happen in trades as well, where it's like there's this kind of like what's called pre-agency, where there's just specific teams and specific markets that don't get these marquee players, and San Antonio is not a traditional, go out and sign big time free agents, so they got to do this through a trade. De'Aaron Fox, one of the things too, when we talked about and you had said, his success in Sacramento, which is relative, it's the first time they made the playoffs in 20 years. They didn't win the playoff series. They lost to the Warriors, which is okay. You lose to the Warriors, that's fine. No one's going to hold that against you. De'Aaron Fox, I think also last year or 2 years ago, was won the NBA's new clutch award, which is basically this is one of the top performing players in the last 5 minutes of close games. So De'Aaron Fox, definitely, he's not a superstar in that level, but he's a really good player. He's going to have a ton of success with Victor Wembanyama. The amount of lob threats he's going to get with him. I mean, he's a really good point guard. He's one of those combo guys where it's he is a scorer, but he's also a facilitator. He's a good enough defensive player. He's not going to be mistaken for Gary Payton or anything like that. But overall, I mean, he's a really, really solid player. This is really going to electrify their offense. One of the biggest things with Victor Wembanyama is really making sure that there are players who can space the floor for him so he's not crowded. Their first round pick this year, Stephon Castle, who they took from UConn, is a really good player. He's really kind of starting to, come into his own as okay, this guy could be a really good player, still has a shaky outside shot. That's going to be something he's going to have to develop. But with De'Aaron Fox, one of the things that San Antonio was lacking, we talked about teams solving issues. Jimmy Butler, the Warriors are one of the worst one of the lowest free throw attempt teams in the league. Jimmy Butler is one of the highest free throw attempt players in the league. That's going to solve an issue. The San Antonio Spurs, in terms of their point guard drives, I think were 25th or 26th in the league. So they were definitely towards the bottom. De'Aaron Fox is a guy who can drive. So he's going to help with that. That dribble penetration is going to open up extra opportunities for them. I love this trade for San Antonio. I think it's the right thing. And then all the word too that came out beforehand and why this deal got done was also De'Aaron Fox basically saying, I want to go play in San Antonio. I want to go play with Wemby. So it's not a situation like with Luka in LA, where it's well, we think we can sign Luka, but there's this very real possibility. There's also this real possibility where he could just walk in 2 years. De'Aaron Fox, he's going to stay there. He's going to play. He identified that as a long-term solution. So that's a big win for San Antonio. So I love this deal for the Spurs. I think they gave up nothing of consequence here. And, you talked about some of those draft picks. So here's the draft picks that they gave up. They gave up 3 first rounders. So they gave up a 2025 first round pick from Charlotte that's lottery protected. Charlotte's one of the worst teams in the league. So Charlotte's going to keep their pick. So that essentially, because of that trade, it's going to convert to 2 second round picks. The second first round pick is a 2027 San Antonio first round pick. So that's 2 years from now down the road.
But it's
the expectation.
I was just going to say the same thing. The expectation is that Victor Wembanyama is going to become a juggernaut in this league if he hasn't already. So the expectation is that pick probably not going to be very good.
Exactly. And then the other pick is this 2031 first round pick from Minnesota that's unprotected, which Minnesota, again, you talked about Sacramento, a team, and we'll get to Sacramento a team that doesn't have sustained success. Minnesota, we don't know what's going to happen with them. I mean, they made the conference finals last year. Their team, they traded Karl Anthony Towns. They're not the same team this year. I love Anthony Edwards. I think that he is, he's going to be one of those next guys to kind of take that torch as, one of the premier players in the league. But that's 6 years down the road. We have no idea what that means. So that pick could be the only one of consequence. But again, it's 6 years down the road. Who are we to say? So I think the Kings did fine in this deal. De'Aaron Fox clearly wasn't happy. Getting Zach LaVine, Zach LaVine is especially in Chicago, he's polarizing in the sense because I think because he's paid like a superstar, everyone is like, you have to hold him to the superstar standard. I don't think he's that, but he's still a really good player. He is he's one of the most efficient offensive players in the league. Defensively, he's fine. When he came to the Bulls, he was terrible. So the improvement he makes from terrible to, maybe average, I think he deserves a ton of credit. And when we sit and we talk about how ugly of a public divorce like Jimmy Butler had, Zach LaVine's name has been in trade conversations for 2 years. You never heard a peep out of him. He just put his head down, went to work. So I think he's a good player. I don't love the fit in Sacramento. It's like you already have DeMar DeRozan there. You've seen what this movie is. They had, they made one playoff round and they got their ass kicked by the Bucks. So it's like, okay, we've seen this movie before. Right. It's probably not going to end well. The Kings are a disaster as an organization. You talked about it too. You said how they've treated players. They've treated coaches even worse. Yes. Mike Brown was the most successful coach they had. They lowballed him in contract negotiations over the summer, finally agreed to an extension, and then fired him in the middle of the season. So again, we've talked about the organizational incompetence. You're just going to have these type of things going on with Sacramento. They can't get out of their own way. So I think they did fine, for getting a player. They got, again, draft picks. It's not going to ultimately turn in anything. I just kind of feel bad for them because they had a good thing going 2 years ago, and they were just kind of like they standed pat because they're like, we like what we have. They didn't have the same success, and then they just completely blew everything up and acted like they were never going to have success. So it really sucks to kind of see. Yeah. For the Bulls, let's get to the Bulls.
Okay. They picked. Yeah. Go ahead.
They picked a direction. They finally said.
Did they though? Because I get what you're saying. They picked a direction on Zach LaVine, but they still kept Vooch. They still kept Kobe White. They still kept Patrick Williams. Did they pick a direction?
I think Patrick Williams has one of the worst contracts in the NBA. Besides Bradley Beal, I think it's like he's making $18 million a year. He's having his worst year. It's just one of those things where it's like, who were you negotiating against? I mean, when the deal got signed, it was bad. Everybody was like, wait, what? I think we didn't need to give him the 5th year. We didn't need to give him a player option at the end. I think with, Vucevic, I don't really know what his market was. He's making everyone kind of kept putting him back everyone was like, oh, he's going to go to the Lakers or the Warriors. But the Lakers and the Warriors both were like, well, we have better things that we're going to get. The Lakers got Luka, the Warriors got Jimmy Butler. And I think that's the right deal. I don't think that I don't think he has a market right now. Now, maybe he does over the summer, but again, you're right too. They don't really have anything. They also re-signed Lonzo Ball, which I have mixed feelings about because I really like Lonzo and I think it's a fine deal. And I'm not going to bash them for that because I do think sometimes you do need veterans. You do need competent NBA players. And when you're not spending a boatload of money, I don't have too much of a problem. The return back, I think, is just I don't think that you were ever going to get you weren't going to get the dollar for dollar trade, for Zach LaVine. It was just like he was always kind of a sunk cost. His contract was very hard to move. And, he's had his own injury history too with his knees. So it's not like he's actually coming in and you're like, oh, I feel super confident about giving him $100 million over the next couple of years. So it's, again, they made a decision. It's too little too late. I'm totally fine with it because I understand because they should have made this move 6 months ago and they should have just been tanking for Cooper Flag right now instead of, they're going to be picking 8th or 7th again because that's just what they do. The fucking Bulls. They pick 7th and 8th. They're going to win 35 games. And
Probably get bounced in the first round of the play-in. Yeah, yeah. It's very hard to be a Bulls fan right now, but hey, it is what it is. All right. So my fourth one was the Mark Williams trade that got rescinded. So why don't you give me your fourth one of, kind of most significant deal?
yeah, my fourth one was the Cavs and the Hawks. So the Cleveland Cavaliers acquired DeAndre Hunter, and the Atlanta Hawks got Karis LeVert, George Niang, 3 second-round picks, and 2 pick swaps.
This trade was my honorable mention.
Okay. Yeah. So I for Cleveland, I thought this was a perfect fit. I think
Just
Hunter
perfect. Yeah.
sliding into there in that forward spot, you've got, and then he's also kind of one of those like more theoretical than practical players. Like, I mean, he's long, he's 6'9". His shooting numbers were not where they were, consistently, but again, defensive profile. This is a team that has two really small guards in Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, adding another big wing already. Plus, you've got Jared Allen with Evan Mobley back there. They're going to be a bitch to play. Like, that is not a fun team to like go against. Now they need to be healthy. That's the biggest thing. Hunter, he's on a really good contract too. Like that's the biggest thing. LeVert was essentially a free agent. I don't think that they were really going to re-sign him. Cleveland is going to have their own financial, windfalls coming soon. But I like what they're doing in terms of just basically being like, fuck it, we're going to go for it. Like, they have a window right now. Their team is really good this year. Kenny Atkinson has done an unbelievable job. One of the other things too another reason why they did this was to avoid the luxury tax this year. So again, that's a big part of it as well. For Atlanta, I don't know what's going on with their team. They are a team where I'm just like, what are they doing? Like, the DeJounte Murray trade that they made in the offseason was kind of fine. Like, that clearly wasn't working. They got a decent return. Dyson Daniels has been awesome defensively for them. And then, unfortunately Murray gets hurt. So like, that's kind of thing that sucks. Like, you can't properly grade it. But if you're Atlanta, you're like, whew, we dodged a bullet.
Right.
But they trade Hunter. They trade Bogdanovich as well to the Clippers. And so I'm like wondering, and I'm like, what the hell is this team doing? Like, they were kind of fun. And it's a whole nother thing of like, what is your direction with this team? We talked about, you talked about Trae Young, another like really, really good NBA player, super fun to watch. But this is a team that doesn't have its first round pick this year. So it's not like they can like tank and be like, oh, let's go try and get Cooper Flag. That pick is going to San Antonio. So like, what are they doing? For the Cavs is very clear, like, okay, we're going for it this year, and I applaud that. But with the Hawks, I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, you've got an all NBA player potential all NBA player in Trae Young. He's playing really well this year. I think he got named as an all-star reserve, or he might be like one of the replacements. So
he was an all-star replacement.
Perfect. Like, great for him. Like, I think he's a guy that has really worked on his game and like to be a little bit more easier to play with. But it's just very confusing. And again, and everyone would be like, oh, they had the number one pick, so they were a bad team. It's like, no, they actually like moved up in the lottery. I think they had the 10th best odds when they won it. And like Reece Sachet, he's shown some real flashes as like a nice complementary player, which not always the best thing you want with your number one pick, but this was a weird draft. There wasn't a franchise level player.
This was a very weird draft class. And
it was,
yeah.
So yeah, that's just it. Atlanta just left me very confused.
Yes. I ultimately agree with everything that you just said. I thought this was a home run for the Cavs, who's going for it this year. They the couple of times that they've played some of the NBA's top tier teams, they've come out on top. That game that they played against the Thunder it was either earlier this month or last month. That was probably the game of the year so far, and potentially an NBA Finals preview. So they still have to get through Boston because Boston's tried and true, and so we'll see what happens. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing what the Cavs do from this point forward. So that was your number 4. This was my honorable mention. So the only other one that I had here, this swap for Chris Middleton and Kyle Kuzma.
Yep, and that was my next one.
And the reason why I picked it, I did not pick it because I thought it made basketball sense, because I don't. I like it just feels it's just a sad way to end Chris Middleton's tenure in Milwaukee because Chris Middleton has been there for a long time. He was instrumental in bringing them a championship. He's grown up with Giannis. It's just sad, and it felt that this kind of feels like what these are kind of like some of the ramifications of what happens when you kind of fuck around with the collective bargaining agreement because Chris Middleton has been injured a lot recently. He hasn't gotten very many chances to, be on the court at the same time that Damian Lillard and Giannis have been on the court together too. Their team has been fine. The Bucks have been, okay. They're not they're they're never going to break the top two in the East because Boston and Cleveland have pretty much got those two spots locked up. So, but these non-play-in spots, so 3 through 6, those are still up for grabs. They're definitely going to grab one of those. It's just a sad state for Kyle Kuzma, who Kyle Kuzma is a fine player. He was instrumental in the Lakers winning that bubble championship, but it doesn't feel like it really moves the needle very much on Milwaukee's end. And at least Middleton going to the Wizards gives them a bit of a veteran presence for a young team who feels kind of directionless. And I just feel bad for Middleton to have to get banished to Washington so that Milwaukee can find a proper trade suitor.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. It just kind of felt like, thanks, Chris Middleton, for, everything you did. I mean, this was, again, this move was specifically done so that the Bucks could get under the second apron. So Kuzma has he has a smaller cap number, but he's on a or like a declining contract essentially. So his number goes down next year. So this is a money move for the Bucks. They traded AJ Johnson, who was their first round pick this year, who came in as a very raw player as well. And it's just another line of the Bucks failing. I don't want to say failing with first round picks because they used part of their picks for the Drew Holiday trade that netted them a championship and for Damian Lillard. But they just have not been able to kind of find those fringe guys. And again, it matters so much in this era to be able to just get some type of return. Again, you're not saying these guys got to develop into a rotational player or even a starter, but it's like you want them on the rotation. You want them to be able to show that potential. And then they threw in a 2028 first round pick swap, which I thought was very interesting because Giannis is not under contract for that year. And again, we'll see what happens. As much as I hate trading the draft picks, the pick swaps are the ones that piss me off the most because everyone's like, oh, they could swap picks. I'm like, but it's like, okay, but like they have to be like really good. Like if the Bucks finish with the 10th worst record and the Wizards are still a bad team and they finish with the eighth worst record, the swap means nothing. It's like, so that's one of those things. So again, it's kind of one like, oh, we got a first round pick, but we'll see what happens with it. So I'm kind of with you with the Bucks where it's like, I still have so much respect for Giannis and he is terrifying. And I think if he gets in the playoffs, like I'm not going to bet against him, but this is still a team. And Kuzma, we'll see what happens with him. He was in basketball purgatory for the last few years with Washington. They have been just an abysmal basketball operation. So you kind of hope that he can, recollect some of that magic from when he was with the Lakers, but we'll see. It's going to be a challenge, I would think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you just have your honorable mention and that's it.
Yeah, I mean the only other honorable mention I had was the Brandon Ingram trade. I'm going to the Raptors, and
I considered putting that on my list, but
it was just for me. It was just weird. It was like and after the trade happened, he also agreed to an extension to stay. So it was kind of one of those things where it was like, okay, it made sense now that he was going to resign. But it was just very much, the Raptors were also a team where it's like, what are they doing? Like, they traded OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam last year. And so you're like, okay, they're probably going to tank. And then it's like, well, no, they're going to trade for Brandon Ingram. And it's like, they've got all this money tied up to Brandon Ingram, Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickly, and then Jakob Pertl is their center. And I'm just like, what is this team? Like, I just don't think, like, none of these guys like make basketball sense. Like, this is like a fantasy basketball team is what it looks like to me. It doesn't look like a complementary team. So I didn't love the fit. I mean, the stuff they gave up, fine. Like, Bruce Brown, I think he had a team, like they've been trying to trade Bruce Brown for like a year, so it didn't really matter. The Pelicans, I don't think we're ever going to re-sign him, and they're a team, they're I don't want to call them a cheap organization, but they're a smaller market team. They were trying to get under the luxury tax, so that was a big deal for them. And they got an Indiana first round pick, which Indiana might be good, so whatever, we'll see. But it was just one where I was like, okay, it didn't really make sense, but I think that, we'll see what happens. They left me very confused. And I thought the Pelicans did fine. Again, they've been trying to trade Brandon Ingram for like 2 years, so it makes sense.
I guess the only thing that confused me specifically for the Pelicans is that if I take your premise that says I don't know what Toronto is doing right now with their team, which I fully agree with, because they seem like a collection of good players, but can they play together as a team? I don't know. That's a good question. And they've had some mismanagement steps where they let Fred VanVleet just go for nothing, and they let Kyle Lowry just go in free agency, pretty much. So I don't know what Toronto was doing post Kawhi Leonard trade, but hey, it is what it is. They got a ring out of it, so good for them. I think I'm more confused about the Pelicans because the Pelicans, there's a lot of rumors swirling around about what they're going to do about Zion Williamson. And, you hear a lot of people who talk about Zion Williamson being somebody who could be a generational talent, but he's constantly hurt, again, because of conditioning issues, but also he's constantly hurt because he hasn't really developed much in terms of his game because he's still not a great shooter. His defense is just nowhere near what it needs to be. And then his off the court stuff, just lots of drama there as well. So I am very curious to see if anything's going to come about in the off season to try and, like, is it time to blow this thing up? I don't know, but I'm more confused about what the Pelicans are doing than I am with what the Raptors are doing right now.
Yeah, and they've had a nightmare year with injuries. I mean, so many stretches of guys just being gone. I think they're a talented team. I think that they have good players. They've got, Trey Murphy has really kind of developed into like one of the better shooters in the league. I still like Herb Jones. CJ McCollum is a good veteran to have. But, it's kind of like that. It's like, what's their direction? What do they go with Zion? And Zion is like, I think the way that Luka was being talked about in terms of like a guy that's not committed to it and all that, like that's exactly what Zion is. It's like that's Zion's problem. And he's never done anything. He's been in the league. This is his sixth year. I think he's played in 6 playoff games. So he's a guy that, again, as we start talking about the limitations that teams have with salaries and everything, he's going to be a fascinating guy to watch this offseason because he's got a big contract. There's definitely not the return on him that the team has gotten. And this is a small market team. And they're probably really happy to still have Zion, but they also probably in the back of their minds are like, if we're able to wipe our hands clean, we'll do it. But it's just finding a home for him. I don't know where the right fit is for him because I don't know what he is as a basketball player in his finality. And I also don't know what the best fit for him long-term is. We've never seen him really play with too many good players. He played with Brandon Ingram, obviously, for his career, but, it's like, what is the right situation for him? Is your situation having him bring the ball up? But then what do you do from a defensive standpoint with him? So he's going to be one of the more fascinating players this offseason to watch.
Yeah. All right. So I'm unfortunately at time. So why don't we leave it at this? And do you have any other thoughts about the trade deadline or anything else that you want to talk about? Like, is there any team that you think kind of has elevated themselves to a point where it's like, okay, because they made this trade, they're going to be in the mix now?
Yeah, I think Cleveland. I think Cleveland is a team where, if they hold on to the number one seed, I think basically what that's going to mean for them is avoiding Boston and New York until the conference finals. I think that that's their best path at this point. I think that they're well positioned right now. The East is really in a lot of flux. Again, I think Boston and New York, the winner of that series is, that's going to be a bloodbath. But then after that, there's so many question marks. Milwaukee, we talked about where, I'm terrified of Giannis, but I don't know how the rest of that team is. The Pacers, they're a fun team, but did they catch lightning in a bottle last year, getting in the conference finals? The only team that really I don't want to say I worry about, but the only team that would, maybe cause some legitimate concern is the 76ers. But that's basically assuming that Joel Embiid all of a sudden gets into phenomenal shape, Paul George refines himself, and they can kind of work this out. But they're kind of a team that it's like, well, if things break properly, but Philly's never had things break properly, so I'm not counting on them. So I'm I'm thinking Cleveland, like again, and I love that Cleveland went for it because I think the windows in the NBA are so small. And I hope that they go for it. And I hope that they get a real opportunity to go to the NBA finals because I think their team is that talented.
Yeah, Cleveland feels like the obvious pick here because I don't think Milwaukee did themselves any favors. There's a couple teams kind of in the East that they didn't do much of anything because one is because they made their big move over the summer, and that's New York. Surprised that they didn't go for anything, but they made their big splashy trade over the summer. And then Brooklyn didn't do much of anything, which I would have expected that they would have been more active trying to move people out. This by no means says that I think that they're a championship contender by any means, but the fact that they kept a couple people that everybody resoundingly thought were going to get traded was curious. Orlando is a team that I was surprised that they did nearly nothing at the trade deadline, but they got a good thing going, and injuries have kind of depleted their season. And then on the West, I mean, Phoenix was the only one that's like, okay, you moved Yusuf Nurkic, but that's about it. And now your locker room's toxic. And the only other team that I would say has kind of bolstered their championship odds up, maybe just a little bit, is probably the Warriors, because the Warriors are going to take advantage of the fact that the Dallas Mavericks are going to, like a lot of their forwards and their centers, they're getting hurt. And they're going through, a stretch where they're still in the play-in mix. But I think if anyone's going to capitalize on that, I think it's going to be the Warriors because they've been there, done that, and hopefully Jimmy Butler will propel them to something greater. So yeah.
Seedings and matchup are going to be so fascinating in the West because it's like you can make an argument for almost any team, but then if they're matched up, like, especially like even a team like Houston or Memphis, like those are like Houston, I think is the one team where it's like everybody wants to play them because they're going to be the most untested team. So, a team like Golden State, like if you get that matchup and then all of a sudden, you're playing the right teams, if you can avoid Denver, now the path to the conference finals, it's not crazy. And then anything can happen after that. Teams are banged up. It's going to be a really fun playoffs.
All right. Well, Adam, thank you very much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. Always looking forward to catching up with you via sports. Do you have anything you want to plug or anywhere that people could find you if they want to continue to hear your sports talk?
No, I mean, it's just even on my Instagram, I think it's still just my same one, Adam Rads at Adam Rads 0925. And yeah, we will pop on for more stuff in the next coming months because we got football stuff coming up. We got NBA playoffs. I'm here.
All right. Cool. Sounds good. Looking forward to having Adam on for more talk coming up soon. That's going to do it for this episode of Sportsball. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to anything and everything SPDM Crew, wherever you get your podcast. Join us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, YouTube, and Blue Sky at SPDM Crew. Check out our website at SPDM. Shout out to High Flyer Creative Studios for making our awesome logo. Greatly appreciate their support. And if you have any marketing, logo, or brand standard needs, contact them at highflyercreative.com. Check out our other shows on the podcast network. We've got shows about movies, TV, music. We've got shows about physical media collections. We've got shows about comic books. So check out all the other shows on our network, and we greatly appreciate the support. And if you've got a podcast idea or you're interested in being part of the SPDM crew as a guest or collaborating, email us at spdmcrew@gmail.com. Until next time, pain heals, chicks dig scars, glory lasts forever.